Welcome to Train Signal. I'm Chris Bryant, CCIE number 12933, and this is video 6, AAA, and that is short for Authentication, Authorization, and Accounting. And as you take a look at the whiteboard, you'll see that we'll be discussing all three of those A's in this particular video. And for those of you who have already passed the BCMSN exam, a lot of this section will seem familiar. But again, I warn you, don't fast forward through the parts you think you know, because there are going to be some details in here that you might not know. And you really cannot know enough about AAA. And there's a lot to know here. We're going to hit this particular information in detail and work up some live examples as well. And as we get started here, before we start to configure it though, let's look at each one of these A's in detail. And the first one is authentication. This is the simple question: should user X be allowed to access the network or a network service? It's just that simple. Are we going to let this person in or not? Are we going to let this person telnet in or not? The authentication options, we have three. Two of them are fairly major topics for this particular exam, and those are TACACS Plus and Radius. And you can see that TACACS Plus is Cisco proprietary, and it's a TCP-based protocol. Radius is an open standard UDP-based protocol. And you know just as well as I do that with little differences like that, that's the kind of thing Cisco really likes to ask about. The third one is Kerberos, or Cerberus, or depending on which FAQ you read, this can actually be pronounced, I think, about 6 different ways. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. But for now, I want you to know that it is superb for authentication, but the drawback to it, at this point offers no authorization or accounting services, and those are the other two A's in AAA. So if we're looking for the best authentication scheme, we're probably going to go to Kerberos. And another reason we would do that is if the data encryption standard, DES, was required. If that's the case, we have to use Kerberos. We cannot use TACACS Plus or Radius. And as I mentioned here, it can be pronounced many ways. Actually, there's an excellent fact that I'm going to show you in just a moment. I've put another excellent link on here for some further reading about this protocol. And it's not a major topic on your exam. It never hurts to do a little extra reading, though, particularly about this protocol, because it's prevalent out there. I mean, there's a lot of this. So you can certainly visit the website that I've put there on the whiteboard. That's an excellent place to get started. And here's a FAQ, and you can see the address there in the window. And if you don't want to jot all that down right now, all I did was put pronounce Kerberos in Google, and this was, I believe, the second match. And it's an excellent FAQ, but I do think it's kind of funny here. You know, they talk about where the name came from, and then they go into a little bit of a discussion about how it is actually pronounced. You know, is this really the dog that guarded the entrance of Hades? That kind of thing. And they do go into a discussion here about how it should be pronounced. I believe 3 or 4 here are listed. And I tell you what, if someone with a PhD in linguistics is in there, I will go with whatever that person says. That's good enough for me. So Michael Covington and some other fine people there, and it's a good fact to read overall to see how this particular protocol works. You know, you've got all kinds of tickets used as a ticket system, differences between different versions, that kind of thing. It's a great site. It's not required for your exam prep, but I would spin through that if I were you. Couldn't hurt a bit. There's a lot of Kerberos out there. There's another question here. If there's a TACACS Plus, you know, what about TACACS? TACACS was the original version of this protocol, very rarely used today. It's hard to even find Cisco documentation on it, so it's certainly not going to be an exam topic, but you'll definitely see some TACACS Plus. And also the reason I mentioned the MIT website here is that Kerberos was actually developed by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So there's no better place to get information on that than the source. So now we're going to step back into Cisco world, and do a little comparison here between TACACS Plus and Radius. And while TACACS Plus encrypts the entire packet, Radius is going to encrypt only the password in the initial client-server packet, so that's not very much encryption there. Radius actually combines the authentication and authorization processes, which we're going to speak about later in this video. But it's hard with Radius, if not impossible, to run authentication and not run authorization. So if you've got a desire to run one but not the other, you're probably going to lean toward TACACS, because as I mentioned here on the bottom of the whiteboard, TACACS Plus considers authentication, authorization, and accounting to be separate processes. Good list of protocols to know here about what Radius doesn't support. NASI is the Novell Asynchronous Services Interface Protocol. Radius also does not support NetBIOS Frame Protocol Control Protocol. I love it when protocol's in there twice. The X25 Packet Assembler Disassembler, otherwise known as PAD, and the more common of these four is the AppleTalk Remote Access Protocol. And let me put a slash in there because I put two names for it here. You'll see it either called ARAP or in some documentation ARA. It's the AppleTalk Remote Access Protocol. Much more common to see it as ARAP, but I have seen it both ways. TACACS Plus does support all of those protocols, and having worked through this, I can tell you this is very true. Radius implementations from different vendors may not work well together or at all. And that can be a bit of a nightmare when you've got different vendors involved with the Radius. I understand it's not as bad as it used to be, but it used to be pretty bad. So again, I lean toward TACACS Plus on any of these between TACACS Plus and Radius. But good to know the differences there and the reasons why we would select one over the other. Regardless of which A we're configuring, or even if we're configuring multiple of them, we have got to use the command AAA new model, the global configuration command, to enable AAA in the first place. Then what we're going to do is define the location of the TACACS Plus and or Radius server, and we're going to configure both, and then along with a shared encryption key that has to be agreed upon by the router and the TACACS or Radius device, because those two devices are going to be waiting for a key, a shared key value. And it is encrypted, and it's got, of course, to be the same, and it is case sensitive. You always want to assume case sensitivity. So here on router 2, we're going to enable AAA right there. Now we're going to define the location of the TACACS server, and we'll go through iOS help and see the options. And we're not going to look at all these options today. The ones we're most interested in right now are host and key, for specify the server and specify the encryption key. And we'll set that to 12.123.1 and set a key as CCNP. I left the host word out. Key CCNP. I'll hit enter so we can see both commands, and I'll set the Radius server for 123.3. And that's all there is to it. Now, of course, we can specify multiple servers for either one of these protocols. You can specify the key there at the end of the host command, or you can set it just by itself with the TACACS server or Radius server key command. But if you want to use different keys for different hosts, you're going to have to put it at the end of the statement, which makes sense. Now, right now, though, we've got a TACACS server configured at 123.1 and a Radius server at 123.3. The router's configured with a client of both of them, with a shared key of CCNP for both of them. Now we need to determine which servers will be used for authentication and in what order, because we can configure them so that if one fails, and I mean by that the server failing, not the authentication failing, then it rolls over to the second method. And we do that with the AAA authentication login command. And we'll look at iOS help for this because we have a choice here between a named authentication list or a default list that will be used for all authentications. And what we're going to do here is create a default list. And we'll keep using iOS help because the AAA commands are going to be pretty long. Here's another use for the enable password though. Notice that we have a couple of interesting options here. We could use this router's enable password for all authentication. We also have an option to use a line password for authentication. We also have an option to use local username authentication. So we've got a lot of options when it comes to AAA. Now if we chose to use that, remember the username password command that we used to build that database, that's what would actually be used. But we don't want to do that right now. We want to use the TACACS server first. But notice that there is no option here for TACACS yet. It's a little tricky. You need to put the word group in, and then the radius and TACACS hosts are going to show up, the configuration for that. So we're going to put TACACS first. Now I already said this, I believe, once, but notice that we can keep configuring other methods. The enable password is still here, the line password, the local password, and an interesting option there at the end, no authentication. Why would I go to all this trouble and then type no or none? We'll talk about that in a moment. But let's go ahead and put radius here, and we're going to leave it at that. And actually we'll need group radius. So that's a pretty long command there. And while I'm saving there, we'll take a look at that again. It's AAA authentication login default group TACACS group radius.